Hi, Steve here, and this is my weekly diet update video. I haven't lost any weight this week. I still weigh 240 pounds. I think because it was Thanksgiving and I did grub a lot on Thursday, and then I had a lot of leftovers yesterday. But still, this diet has been coming along well. I've been losing 5 pounds a week. Probably try to keep going until I'm down to about 200. We'll see how long that takes. It's not just the diet and the going to the gym. I think a lot of it has to do with making these videos so I can hold myself accountable. So this week I will be sharing with you my science fiction and fantasy movie collection. These are mostly DVDs and Blu-rays. So we'll start off with a compilation here of old sci-fi movies, 12 Hours of the Future, or Tales from the Future. I've watched all of these, of course. Here's another one, Classics from Outer Space, 14 movies on there. A lot of doubles from these other compilations, but I've probably seen all of them at one point or another. This one has a couple of the old Gamera movies. Here's Lou Ferrigno in Sinbad. Here is The Black Hole from 1978 or 79, one of those years. I find it kind of slow and dull, but I always like to watch it because I enjoy the score. I like the John Barry music in here. Here's Jurassic World on Blu-ray. I enjoyed that. I think I only watched it once or twice, but I enjoyed it for a newer movie. I have Jurassic Park 1 and 2, I believe, but I don't know what happened to them. They're lost somewhere. Back behind me. Here's an old Flash Gordon. I usually pick these up at the dollar store if I can find them. I think this is the 50s TV series, not the 30s version, or the serial. Here's another one of those little DVDs I bought at a dollar store, Magic Sword. It's an old fantasy adventure. I think the evil wizard in there is Basil Rathbone towards the end of his career. Here's John Carter on Blu-ray. I like this movie a lot for a newer movie. I enjoyed this even more than Avatar. I like this movie a lot. I know it didn't get much praise, but I really enjoyed this. I think I saw it 2 or 3 times at the theater. It's based on the old Edgar Rice Burroughs stories. They're about 100 years old by now. He was way ahead of his time, that writer. This movie got me interested in reading his stories, and the stories are even better than the movie, I thought. Here's a sci-fi movie, Super Mario Brothers. Nothing like the video game, of course. I guess there's some fun to be had with it, but it's not really my favorite movie. I don't hate it as much as some people do. The Last Starfighter. This is one of my favorites from when I was a kid. Hell Comes to Frogtown. I have to get anything with Rowdy Roddy Piper in it. Forbidden Planet. This is a really good old movie. I think Star Trek and all modern sci-fi space movies owe a lot to this movie. This movie's really good for the time. It's back in the 50s, I believe. Leslie Nielsen's the star. Here's some more episodes of that Flash Gordon series from the 50s. I think it's the 50s. The Fifth Element. Every time I watch this movie, I like it more. Here's Dune. I think it has the extended version and the original theatrical version. David Lynch movie. It's really hard to follow, but for a David Lynch movie, it's easy to follow. No, I like this movie a lot. I've liked this ever since I was a kid. I never read the books, but I really enjoy the movie. Here's Desert Warrior with Lou Ferrigno. I think it's a post-apocalyptic action movie, pretty violent. I just got it because it has Lou Ferrigno on it and it was 50 cents. Jean-Claude Van Damme in Cyborg. This is a good old post-apocalyptic action kung fu movie. Here's Transformers, Michael Bay's Transformers. I like this movie a lot. I can take or leave the second two. I really love the first one and the fourth one. The last one that came out, I think it was the fourth one. This is the only one I have. I enjoy this movie a lot. This is probably one of my favorite modern movies within the last 10 or 15 years. Here's another compilation, this one of actually good sci-fi movies. There are only 4 of them, but they're all classics. Soylent Green with Charlton Heston. Forbidden Planet again. Time Machine with Rod Taylor. This is one of my favorite sci-fi movies of all time. I love this movie. The original Time Machine. And 2001: A Space Odyssey, Stanley Kubrick. Here's Abraxas with Jesse Ventura. It's a really low-budget sci-fi movie from the 80s. I only like it because it has Jesse Ventura in it, and he was one of my favorite wrestlers when I was a kid. And here's 2010, the year we made contact. I can take or leave this movie. I just like it because it has Roy Scheider in it. Here's one of my favorites, Total Recall with Arnold Schwarzenegger. They don't make good action sci-fi movies like this anymore. This is so gory and action-packed and kind of silly, but it takes itself seriously. I really like this movie. Here's sort of a hidden gem. I don't know if many people have seen this movie. It's called Baby, The Legend of the Lost Secret. It's about some expedition deep in African jungles and they come across a baby dinosaur. To me, this was a lot like Jurassic Park before Jurassic Park. A lot of the special effects back then were really good. It feels a lot like a Steven Spielberg movie. I don't know who directs it. I'm not familiar with the guy that directs it. B.W.L. Norton. It has Jerry Goldsmith music in it. It's really epic and Steven Spielberg-esque. It's a really good dinosaur adventure movie from the 80s. It has the guy from TV's The Greatest American Hero in it, and Sean Young. And the bad guy in here is the guy from that old TV show, The Prisoner. What's his name? Patrick McGoohan. But this is a really good movie. If you haven't seen it, check it out, please. I excluded my Star Wars movies from this collection because I'll probably do a video dedicated to that. So, I'm not going to share with you my Star Wars movies. I will show you my Star Trek movies. We don't have all of them. My wife doesn't care for 1 and 3. So I don't have those 2, but we have Wrath of Khan. I think that's everyone's favorite. By everyone, I mean the majority of nerds. This is my favorite Star Trek movie, Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home with whales, the one in San Francisco. This one's more of a comedy movie. I've always loved movies where the characters go out of their element into the 80s on Earth and they are out of place. I really like this movie. Star Trek V, The Final Frontier. That's not one of my favorites. I don't really remember much about it. Star Trek VI, The Final Frontier. I like this one a lot. This one is one of my favorites. I saw it at the show when I was a kid with my buddy and his dad, and I enjoyed this a lot. I'm not really a big Trekkie, but I do like this movie a lot. And then here's Star Trek Generations. Captain Kirk and Captain Picard together. Together they form Generations. Star Trek First Contact. This one's my wife's favorite, I think. It's pretty good. It's a lot of the goodness from the Next Generation TV show and a movie, so it has higher production value. Star Trek Insurrection. This just feels like a 2-hour television episode, but my wife likes it a lot. It's not bad. Star Trek Nemesis. This is one of my favorites too. Tom Hardy's in here and he plays a clone of Captain Picard that's evil. Like, he's a young clone of Captain Picard, but that turns out to be an evil man, and he's the main antagonist of the movie. But I thought it would be hilarious if they rebooted Star Trek The Next Generation and got Tom Hardy to be Captain Picard so he could kind of reprise his role. I thought it would be hilarious if that happened. Oh, and then Deep Space Nine. These are my wife's. I was never big into Deep Space Nine. Here's season 1 and season 7. We have a couple random seasons of that. And then I have a season of Star Trek The Next Generation, season 7. I don't know how I came across that. Here's a really great movie. I loved this movie when I was a kid. And it seemed like all the kids liked this movie back in the 80s, but then I found out it was kind of a flop and it didn't make any money, but as far as I remember, everyone loved it. It's a Jim Henson puppet movie. The puppets are so amazing in this. Like, I know I'm old, but I think the puppets in here put CGI to shame. And David Bowie's in here. Jennifer Connelly, when she was a little girl, was in there. It was kind of like Alice in Wonderland type story. David Bowie in there, I thought he was weird when I was a kid, but he seems pretty cool in this movie now that I'm adult. Here's some movie called The Amazons. I don't really remember much about this movie. I must have bought it when I was a teenager because it had scantily clad warrior princesses on there. And here's Jason and the Argonauts, one of my favorite Greek mythology movies ever made, with the stop-go animation of Ray Harryhausen. I love this movie and the Sinbad movies. And here is my favorite Greek mythology movie of all time, Clash of the Titans. My buddies and I watched this all the time when we were kids. This is the bee's knees right here. Clash of the Titans. More Ray Harryhausen stop-go animation. I'm not familiar with the director of this movie. I think he mostly did TV series and TV shows. It actually feels like a mini-series or a TV series. It's kind of a long movie with a few little episodes that lead up to the climax, but it's really, really good. One of the best adventure fantasy Greek mythology movies ever made. When I was a kid, Medusa scared me so much. I didn't even want to look at the TV. I was afraid I'd turn into stone if I saw the TV when Medusa was on there. Here is a collection I have of Conan movies. It's just Conan the Barbarian and then Conan the Destroyer. I like both of those movies. Anything with Arnold Schwarzenegger I like. Here's Princess Bride. This is one of my all-time favorites. I saw this when I was a kid. I was kind of skeptical about it because I thought it was like a sissy movie, but once I watched it, it's good. I was won over just like Fred Savage's character was won over in this story by his grandpa who was reading him the book. But this movie's a lot of fun. I think it's Rob Reiner directed it. Anyway, this is one of the best like fantasy movies out there. And Andre the Giant is in it. He was one of my favorite wrestlers at the time. Here is the Lord of the Rings collection. This is probably the last time I went to the movie when I was really blown away by something. Like, I think back to this and feel nostalgia. But I think I was in my 20s when it came out, but I still feel like how I feel when I think of older movies like Clash of the Titans. I saw this at the show and it blew my mind. The first one, Fellowship of the Rings. This is my favorite movie of the Lord of the Rings trilogy, Fellowship of the Ring. It blew my mind when I saw it. And I read the books, and I know a lot of it's different from the book, but pretty much the overall feel of it's dead on, like everything I would always want for a Lord of the Rings movie. Peter Jackson, the guy that directed Bad Taste and Dead Alive, directed Lord of the Rings, and it's darn near perfect. The second one was awesome too. I saw that at the show many times with my brother and my buddy, and my wife was my girlfriend at the time. And then the third one, I think I only saw that once, and I know that's the one that won all the Academy Awards and everything, and I'm glad it did, but it's not really my favorite of the three. It was just pretty much a big battle royal between every single Middle-earth race. Not that that's a bad thing, but my favorite is always the first one. Here's H.G. Wells' Things to Come. I never saw this movie. I just bought it because it was 50 cents at the music store, but maybe I'll give it a watch today. Okay, here's Roddy Piper in John Carpenter's They Live. This is one of my favorite sci-fi movies from the 80s. It has a pretty interesting story, plus Roddy Piper's in it, so you're going to get a WWF style fight in the middle of the movie that's really good. Here's probably one of the best sci-fi movies ever made, Terminator. I consider it a horror movie too. It's really scary. Just the idea of an unstoppable man that has metal inside of him. An unstoppable killing machine. Terminator 2. James Cameron directed this one again, of course. This is more of an action movie, but it's top notch. Probably the last greatest action movie ever made. Sci-fi action, not so much horror this time. Although the T-1000 guy was pretty scary. Terminator 3, Rise of the Machines. I don't like this as much as the first two, of course. It's not James Cameron, but it's good for what it is. Arnold's back. I think he's as jacked as ever. And there's a hot lady Terminator in this one that's the villain, who looks pretty good. More Arnold Schwarzenegger. Here's The Running Man. I always liked this movie a lot when I was a kid. Pro Wrestling, American Gladiators, and Escape from New York. Here's Arnold Schwarzenegger in The Predator. This movie is so good and it's scary. Usually the victims in horror movies are defenseless teenagers, but this one they're big tough soldiers, like the toughest dudes you can think of, but the movie is still scary considering that. Like Arnold Schwarzenegger's in here, Carl Weathers, like what do those guys have to be scared of? Jesse Ventura is one of them, just like the biggest, manliest men, but the movie is still scary. That shows how scary that monster is, that the Predator. Here's Predator 2 with Danny Glover. I didn't like this one quite as much, but this is still really good. Here's the original Planet of the Apes with Charlton Heston. This is the only Planet of the Apes movie I like. I think monkeys are irritating. Or I guess I'm just afraid of them because I know they could rip my head off. A monkey this big could probably rip my head off. So I'm just scared of them, so I'm not really into those new Planet of the Apes movies, but this one I like a lot. The original. Here's more Charlton Heston, Omega Man. I think this is the second big movie version of I Am Legend. The first one had Vincent Price back in the 60s. This one's the 70s with Charlton Heston. Then there was the newer one with Will Smith. I couldn't tell you which one is my favorite. It might be this one. Here's Jardage with Sean Connery. This is a really weird movie. I saw this when I was a kid. We rented it from the public library or checked it out from a public library, and we got home and watched it, and it was like there were these barbarian men and this big head came out from the clouds, and it was like their god, and it gave them weapons, and it told them to go conquer and multiply. And then for whatever reason Sean Connery was one of these savage barbarian dudes, and he snuck up inside of the god head thing, and it was sort of like a spaceship, and it flew back to where the gods lived. But then when he got there were a lot of topless women, so my mom turned it off. So I never watched it again until I was a teenager or in my 20s. But it's a really weird movie, but it's decent. Here's Kevin Costner in Waterworld. It's like Mad Max on the water. I know that's what everyone says, but that's exactly what it is. And I liked it. I don't know. I guess it was a big flop and the critics hated it, but I've always enjoyed this movie. I liked it probably almost as much as Mad Max. I might have liked it even more than a couple of the Mad Max movies. Here's Underworld. I was never really big into these movies. My wife likes these vampire werewolf type movies. I just like it because this girl is hot. And here's Underworld Evolution. I don't know if that's the second or third one. Here's Masters of the Universe. I saw this at the show when I was a kid. When I was a kid, I was into He-Man. I loved He-Man. That was like the first cartoon I was into. I had all the action figures and all that and watched all the cartoons every day after school. And this movie came out shortly after, and it was nothing like the cartoon, although I liked it a lot. It's a really fun sci-fi action 80s movie. Dolph Lundgren plays He-Man. He's perfect to be He-Man. He doesn't talk a lot. He-Man talked a lot on the cartoon. If you remember He-Man, he wasn't really always about violence and fighting. He would like to talk his way out of stuff and use his morals. But this is more of an action sci-fi movie. I like movies like this. This is another one where the He-Man characters come out of their element and go to Earth in the 80s. Stuff like that just always tickled me. I love stuff like this. Courtney Cox was in there when she was a teenager. And who else is in there? It really feels like a good 80s sci-fi movie because Principal Skinner from Back to the Future is in there. Here's Logan's Run. I'm ashamed to say I had never watched this movie until a couple of years ago, and I liked it a lot. I missed out on this for a long time. This is a really good sci-fi movie from the 70s. I like these 70s dystopian movies, sci-fi type movies. They're really good. Here's Blade Runner, Ridley Scott's Blade Runner with Harrison Ford. It's kind of like a noir cyberpunk. I can't explain it. The look of this movie, nothing has topped the look of this movie. The sets and the feel and the grit of this movie nothing has topped it since this movie. This has never been one of my favorite movies. I watched it when I was a kid and I didn't understand it. I thought it was kind of slow. And then when I got older, I thought I'd watch it again to give it another chance. And I understood it a little more, but I still didn't really care for it. And then a few years ago, I finally watched it and I finally got it. And now I appreciate it and I like it. And here's the 1980 version of Flash Gordon. It's 80 or 81, I forget. But I love all Flash Gordon movies, all the serials and everything, this one included. This is probably my favorite. It has a Queen soundtrack, so the music in here is by Queen. And then it has the guy in here, I think his name is Sam Jones. He's perfect for Flash Gordon. Timothy Dalton is in here, so I gotta have this movie just because Timothy Dalton's in there. James Bond's in here. He plays that Prince Baron. And then Max von Sydow, or Sydow, I can't pronounce his name. He's Ming the Merciless in there. Looks like this came with a couple art inserts. I didn't even know those were in there, of Ming. And here's my Alien triple pack. Ridley Scott's Alien, James Cameron's Aliens, and whoever's Alien 3. Alien 3 is, I don't remember much about it, but Alien 1 and 2 I like a lot. That's about it for today. I'll see you next week with my diet update.